They teased the old man's tattoo over coffee, laughing between refills, while the flag rope clinked against the pole outside. Their jokes pressed like paperwork, polite but cutting, the kind that hides behind uniforms and rules. Then the colonel looked closer. His breath caught the coin on Frank's counter, shining with the same number once crossed out on a fallen roster. Quietly, the diner fell still. Quiet men leave echoes too. The diner clock hummed above the coffee pot, keeping slower time than the town ever did. You see that ink? One of the young another voice joined low. B. Frank Harlow heard them. He always did. He stirred his cup once, twice. But he said nothing. Steam curled up, catching the number etched on his forearm. A small string of digits still. It glimmered faintly in the refill, sir. The waitress asked, young enough to call every man over 50, sir. Her sure, he said. Black's fine. Always is. The way he said always made. Behind him, chairs scraped. One of the cooks walked by, feigning a stretch. Guess tattoos don't wash off. Frank looked down at his hands, steady brown from sun and work, and at the tiny tremor in the cup's surface. Now those. Then silence took the booth beside him. The good kind, the one that tastes like distance but feels like mercy. Eldon Reeves, the diner's oldest cook, leaned in from the pass-through window. Leave the man be, he said. The younger cooks went quiet. Dishes clinked. A truck horn sighed outside. Frank exhaled slowly, as if releasing a chapter no one else had read. Micro Cliff. 15. He looks to the window. The reflection of his tattoo sits beside the flag outside. He wonders if the flag still remembers names. Eldon Frank called softly. You still got that old radio in the back, still hums when the weather turns. Eldon replied. Why, Frank smiled a little. Just want to see if it still catches the right frequency. Then a silent beat, steam rising, porch wind pressing at the glass. I rest marker, but the laughter had already thinned, replaced by the usual clatter of plates and the slow hum of small-town duty. Autumn. A bell jingled as a new customer entered, and the moment folded itself into the diner's routine. Frank left $1 more than the check required, nodded once to the waitress, and walked out beneath the flag's shadow. Outside, sunlight hit the number on his arm again. He tugged his sleeve down, not in shame but in habit. The next morning smelled of burnt toast and paperwork. A clipboard lay on the counter, its metal clip shining like judgment. Frank read the notice once, then again, the words somehow stiffer than the paper itself. All staff must maintain a presentable image for public comfort. He traced the line with his thumb, as if checking for a pulse that wasn't there. The manager, a young man with sleeves too crisp to have seen real work, cleared his throat. Frank, this came from upstairs. I'm supposed to ask you to, cover that tattoo during shifts. Frank looked at him, not angry, just quiet in that way that makes a room smaller. It's a forearm, not a billboard, he said. I know, the manager replied quickly. But rules are rules, and customers, you know. He shrugged, trying to sound official and kind at the same time. He was slammed by protocol, a rule book thicker than understanding. Every letter pressed against him like ceremony, not cruelty. Eldon wiped his hands on a towel, eyes half closed like a man watching a replay he'd seen too many times. "Respect don't need ink approval," he muttered. The manager pretended not to hear. Frank reached for his sleeve, tugging it down with slow precision, each button clicking like punctuation on a silence he didn't choose. Still, he said nothing. Steam hissed from the kitchen line's silent beat, then the sound flattened into radio static from the corner speaker. Frank Eldon said, "Quieter, now you gonna let 'em write your story for you?" Frank smiled, the sort that doesn't reach the eyes. "Not worth the paper, friend." Paper fades. He placed the clipboard back on the counter, aligning its edge exactly with the sugar jar. "Tell 'em it's covered," he said. "That should make everyone comfortable." Comfort. Eldon sighed. Costs too much lately. A bus honked outside, dragging the moment back into motion. Frank adjusted the small badge case beside the register, the one he hadn't opened in years, and for a heartbeat the reflection of his tattoo glowed in the chrome lid. Then he closed it. Eldon's reflection beside Frank's disappeared as a new notice printed from the office machine. Annual inspection. Tomorrow. The clipboard clattered once like a warning bell. Still, the sound lingered longer than the apology that followed. The manager cleared his throat again. "You know, sir, if you need to take tomorrow off," Frank shook his head. "I'll be here. Been showing up longer than that notice has been alive." Eldon chuckled under his breath. "Guess time's the only supervisor that don't retire." Frank allowed himself a small smile. "Yeah," he said. "And it don't sign forms either." The diner smelled different on inspection days, less like coffee, more like nerves and lemon cleaner. Colonel Sloane's car rolled up right on time, tires whispering over the gravel as if they too understood formality. He stepped inside wearing the kind of uniform that made every line mean something. Frank stood by the counter, sleeves rolled down, name tag, polished the tattoo hidden beneath the cotton, like a memory keeping quiet. "Morning, Colonel," he said, steady as the clock. "Morning, Mr. Harlow," Sloane replied, scanning the clipboard. "Annual inspection. Routine." His tone was polite, but the kind that left no room for stories. Emma Reeves, the young archivist from the local records office, followed behind him with a tablet and a box of old personnel files. She smiled nervously, setting the box on the counter. "We're updating the service archive," she explained. "Cross-checking numbers from the veteran registry." Frank nodded once. "Numbers don't change much," he said. "Sometimes the stories behind them do." She tilted her head, curious, then flipped through a folder. Her eyes caught something, a faded black and white roster sheet. "This one's odd," she murmured. The same number was crossed out on his unit's roll. The words hung there, quiet but heavy. Sloane looked up sharply. "What number?" he asked. She showed him the photo, a unit mark scribbled over decades ago, almost erased by time. Frank's arm twitched at his side as if memory itself had tugged it. The colonel frowned. That platoon wasn't listed after 75. Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. The flag outside shifted with the wind, casting a shadow across his hands. He stared at the pattern, the light made bars and stripes moving like breath. Silent beat. Sloane closed the folder, his voice lower now. "I'll review this tonight." "Sure," Frank said, still looking at his hands. "You do that." Emma slipped the photo into a clear sleeve, careful as if touching glass. Eldon leaned from the kitchen, passed through towel over one shoulder. "Paperwork's how we fight wars now," he said with a dry chuckle. "Ink's safer than blood." Sloane didn't respond, but his jaw eased slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Harlow," he said. "We'll be in touch." "You usually are," Frank replied. The colonel paused at the door, eyes landing on the small badge case by the register, the one that hadn't been opened in years. "Still keep that polished," he said. "Old habits," Frank answered. "Or maybe they keep me." The door closed behind them, leaving the sound of the radio playing a faint military march, the kind no one sings to anymore. Emma hesitated, glancing back once. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I think crossed out doesn't mean forgotten." Frank looked up, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. "Depends who's holding the pen." She nodded and left. The diner's hum returned, plates clinking, steam rising. Frank leaned on the counter, eyes on the empty window where the flag's shadow had been. He whispered something to himself, just one word still, and then went back to work. The next morning arrived, dressed in ceremony. The sky hung still over the diner's roof, and the flag outside barely stirred, as if waiting for permission. Inside, everything was cleaner than usual, the counters wiped twice, the windows polished to the point of gilt. Frank didn't say a word. He only checked the percolator, listened to its slow gurgle, and watched the steam twist like old handwriting he could almost read. The clock hit 9 when Colonel Sloane walked in the door, chime breaking the silence like a mild rebuke. He wore the same pressed uniform as yesterday, but something in his step had softened. Behind him came Emma, carrying a folder clutched to her chest, and 2 base clerks who looked too young to understand what paperwork could weigh. The diner fell quiet. Even the grill paused between sizzles. Mr. Harlow Sloane began. "Mind standing with me for a minute?" Frank turned slowly, wiping his hands on a towel, and stepped out from behind the counter. "Sure," he said. His voice carried the calm of a man who had spent half his life waiting for the right moment to stay silent. The colonel opened the folder and laid the roster photo on the counter. "This," he said, "was found in the archive. Your name's not on it, but your number is." Emma leaned forward, voice barely above the hum of the fridge. "We checked twice. That crossed-out line. It's the same code inked on your arm." Frank's eyes stayed on the photo. The ink there was lighter than his own, but it felt heavier. "We thought that platoon was lost," Sloane said, his words flat with disbelief. "Records marked the unit disbanded before your enlistment." "Paper lies easy," Frank replied. "People harder." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the colonel's shoulders dropped. He reached into his pocket and took out a small brass coin, a service medallion worn at the edges. "This belonged to one of them. I didn't know it still existed." Frank nodded once. "Didn't know we still did either." He was slammed by protocol, yet lifted by memory. The sentence didn't leave his lips, but it filled the air like something spoken centuries ago. Sloane looked down the shine of his rank, catching the morning light, then quietly saluted. "Welcome home," he said. The words struck with the weight of a folded flag. Emma blinked fast, pretending to check her notes, but her breath shook once before she steadied it. Eldon came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands. "Guess breakfast inspection's over," he said, voice thin but warm. Nobody laughed, but the tension eased into something gentler, like the smell of coffee after rain. Frank raised his right hand, returning the salute, not sharp, but steady, honest. "Never left," he murmured. Then silence spread through the room. The hum of the refrigerator faded. The sound of plates in the sink stopped mid-clatter. Even the flag outside seemed to hold its breath. Then one flap, slow measured, perfect timing with the pause. The moment became still enough to remember. The colonel lowered his hand. "If you don't mind," he said quietly, "I'd like that coin to stay here for them." "Won't argue with that," Frank replied. He placed the coin next to the photograph fingers, brushing its edge like an old friend's shoulder. Emma took a slow step forward, camera shaking in her hands. "May I?" "If it's for the records," Frank said. The flash clicked soft as an exhale. Outside, a truck engine idled, but no one looked. The flag moved again, this time easier, and sunlight crossed the counter, where the photograph and coin lay side by side. Then Emma said, trying to sound brisk, "I think the record's finally complete." "Records never are," Frank answered, "but this one's close enough." He turned toward the window, the sleeve of his shirt sliding just enough to reveal the tattoo, clear, quiet, unapologetic. The colonel saw it, nodded once, and left without another word. The chime rang again, breaking the silence back into normal air. Eldon exhaled through his teeth. "Never thought I'd see the day a salute stopped the coffee pot." "Guess it runs on respect," Frank said. The old cook grinned. "Respect and beans." The two men laughed under their breath, the sound almost embarrassed to exist. Then quiet again, peaceful, not heavy. Frank looked at the flag's shadow crawling across the counter, touching the coin, touching the photo. The past had finally learned how to stand still, and for the first time in years, so had he. By the following week, the diner's morning chatter sounded different, brighter tuned to a note between pride and apology. The bell above the door kept ringing, not from customers rushing for breakfast, but from neighbors bringing casseroles, coffee tins, and stories. Someone had taped a flyer to the window, Veterans Day breakfast, honoring Frank Harlow. The letters were a little crooked, but the sentiment stood straight. Frank wiped the counter as if it were any other Thursday. "Guess respect comes slow in small towns," Eldon said, flipping pancakes with exaggerated ceremony. "Slow," Frank replied, "but it shows up on time." He didn't smile much, but the edges of his voice had softened. By 8, the diner was full, school kids, postal workers, 2 local police officers off duty, and a retired librarian carrying a folded flag in a glass case. The same flag that had cast its shadow over Frank's hands a week earlier. Emma Reeves stood near the end of the counter, holding her camera again. The plaque she'd helped commission sat on the wall, "To those who served quietly and carried the weight well." Beneath it, the coin from Colonel Sloan gleamed inside a small frame. Frank looked at it only once, just long enough to recognize that it wasn't a medal anymore. It was a marker, a hinge between silence and remembrance. The radio switched tracks static, giving way to a slow instrumental of the national anthem. Conversation drifted lower. The librarian whispered, "Time to fold the flag," and 2 volunteers stepped forward. They moved in careful rhythm, every crease aligned with reverence. Frank stood back, hat in hand. Steam rose from a fresh pot, curling like morning prayers. Silent beat. Eldon leaned in from the kitchen window. "You know," he said, "if I'd known breakfast could get this emotional, I'd have doubled the eggs." A few people chuckled, wiping their eyes at the same time. Frank gave him a look halfway between a scold and a thank you. "Keep cooking," he said. "You're doing your part." When the folding was done, the librarian handed the flag to Frank. He hesitated, then nodded, and set it beside the plaque. For a heartbeat, the whole room seemed to breathe together. A radio voice cracked through the static. "And now please join us in a moment of gratitude for all those who served." The anthem faded under soft applause. That was the moment shorts mark 7 minutes in the kind that video editors would later cut to slow motion. Steam rising, sunlight glancing off the plaque, the coin flashing once before settling back to stillness. The applause wasn't loud. It was better, honest, sustained, uncoached. Frank cleared his throat. "I was never much for speeches," he said, "and I'm still not. But if service taught me anything, it's that quiet doesn't mean forgotten. It just waits its turn." He paused, eyes flicking toward Emma, then Eldon, then the plaque. "Looks like my turn finally showed up." Someone in the back murmured, "About time." The crowd laughed softly. Eldon leaned his elbows on the counter, grinning. "Guess we'll need a bigger coffee pot next year." Frank shook his head. "Same pot. Just keep it full." He glanced once more at the framed coin. The radio announcer returned reading local birthdays, and the sound of forks and plates filled the air again. Through the window, the flag outside caught a small gust, its folds opening and closing like a slow exhale. Inside, Frank refilled a cup, poured a second, without being asked, and let the chatter rise around him. The moment had passed, but it left a hum behind the kind that doesn't fade when the song ends. Afternoon light poured through the diner windows in soft stripes, laying quiet across the counter, where a new frame waited, simple oak, no plaque, yet just promise. The breakfast crowd had gone, leaving only the hum of the ceiling fan and the scrape of a chair as Emma Reeves set down a box of photo prints. Frank was wiping the coffee urns the same way he did every afternoon, steady and deliberate. He didn't notice her until she spoke. "I brought the final copies," she said, sliding a print across the counter. The photo, the plaque text, and the coin layout. The museum board signed off this morning. Frank studied the photo. It showed him and Colonel Sloan in that frozen salute the moment before the room remembered how to breathe. His tattoo was visible just enough the ink faded, but legible the number standing like a survivor. The brass coin caught the light beside it, perfectly centered. "You made it look cleaner than it was," he said. Emma smiled. "History likes its tables polished." He nodded. "Guess so. Didn't think I'd end up in a frame, though." "Everyone does eventually," she said, half teasing. "Some just earn it first." She took the coin from its holder and placed it against the glass. Her hand moved carefully, like someone setting a candle in a church window. Frank reached out and pressed the frame steady while she worked. "That old coin's been through too many hands," he murmured. "Then it knows how to stay put," she said. They worked in silence for a while. Outside, a porch swing creaked somewhere, its rhythm as slow as memory. A faint hymn drifted from the church down the block, soft enough to sound like someone humming through an open window. Emma stepped back. "There," she said. "Legacy display complete." Frank leaned closer. The tattoo print she'd added beneath the coin wasn't exact. It was cleaner, the lines tidier, but the essence was right. Beneath it in small type she'd printed a line, "Truth's the only rank that lasts." He smiled. "Didn't think anyone caught that." "You said it when we were mounting the plaque," she replied. "Sounded like something worth keeping." "Keep it," Emma said, "but let me borrow the story." Frank laughed quietly. "Not sure there's much left to borrow." "Oh, there is," she said. "Most stories just need a place to rest." He didn't answer right away. The light shifted across the counter, touching the coin, catching the edges of the frame. The silence between them felt earned, steady, not empty. After a moment, he said, "When they play that choir song at closing, I like to think the boys from the unit can still hear it. Guess it's habit." Emma smiled softly. "Some habits are hymns in disguise." He chuckled, low and tired. "That's a good line. Put that on your next exhibit." "I might," she said, gathering her papers. "You'll get credit, of course." "Don't put my name too big," he replied. "It'll spook the quiet." She laughed, slinging her satchel over her shoulder. "Deal." The door chimed as she left, letting in a breath of cool air and the echo of distant choir notes. Frank turned back toward the window. The flag outside moved once, a single fold glinting in the sun. He set the frame on the shelf beside the register. The coin caught one last beam of afternoon light, sending it across the counter like a signal. For a moment, it seemed to rest on his arm, the tattoo lines, old and soft, glowing in reply. Silent beat. Frank exhaled long and even. He reached for a towel, wiped the counter one more time, and looked out through the window. The swing creaked again, the hymn faded, and the day eased itself closed. He whispered the line once under his breath, a promise, a prayer, a replay, truth's the only rank that lasts. Then the music stopped, and peace, quiet, steady, earned took its place. The diner closed at dusk, coffee steam curling under the porch light, while a hymn drifted from the church down the street. The new frame caught that fading glow, the photo, the coin, the tattoo print, all proof that some promises keep breathing till long after the men who made them grow quiet. Still, he wiped the counter one more time, the motion steady, gentle, like polishing a memory instead of metal. The flag outside moved once, slow as a heartbeat, and he smiled at its rhythm. Truth's the only rank that lasts.